Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Just to apologize for any technical difficulties, but we're really glad that you could be with us this evening. So, just a reminder, please to pop any comments or questions um, in the comment section on whichever platforms you're watching, and we'll try to filter those through. So, our topic tonight is post-matric mid-pandemic. And I think this is a really topical issue, given that the matric results were released on Feb 23rd, and we all celebrated with the hundreds of thousands of matrics who got their results. But now, these same young people, after facing a year of many difficulties, lost learning time, disruptions, anxiety, are now having to navigate what their next steps look like. And all of this in the continued threat of the next wave and lockdown and what that means for learning opportunities for young people and employment opportunities. And so we really wanted to use this conversation this evening to look at the long-term effects of COVID-19 on the class of 2020, to understand how they've managed to cope thus far, and to unpack some of the options that may be available to them as they move forward into this next phase. Um, and we have some really exciting guests with us this evening, and I'm going to let them do some introductions, but we're going to start bringing them into the room. So first up, we have Corinne Clutie, the CEO at SIBA. Corinne, can you just give us a little intro, please?
Hi, thank you, Crystal. Yes, yes, of course. As Crystal said, my name is Corinne Clutie. I'm going to start with a caveat to say this is my very first live stream. So please be kind as an audience. I am here today in my capacity as the CEO of SIBA Ignition Academy. The one is the academy. Then there is a business school and a trust. The trust takes care of the sustainability of our collective. The SIBA Business School is a private higher tertiary education institution in Cape Town that offers higher certificates and bachelor degrees in business administration. And then the academy's work is really in the vocational space, so shorter courses, courses that links to professions and qualifications on level 4 and 5 in the CETA spaces. And then we're also very passionate about supporting small businesses. I think the main purpose of SIBA is to build new future leaders and support the business leaders of the future. We're into entrepreneurship and business is in our DNA. And I'm very grateful to be part of this panel this evening. And thank you for Cornerstone for inviting me. I hope that I can contribute positively.
We're very glad that you could be here. I think it's really great to have SIBA in the room this evening. And with their model, I'm sure that you have lots to add to the conversation. Then next up, we have Zubair Charles, and he's a high school teacher, so really at the coalface. Zubair, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Zubair Charles. I'm an English home language teacher at Good Hope Seminary High School. This is my 4th year of teaching. And yeah, I'm here to hopefully provide as much insight as to what we as teachers faced last year. And just as Karin, this is my first live as well, and really humbled to be here. So thank you very much.
Don't worry, Zubair, you're in good hands. We've got you. I've done quite a few of these, so yeah, I'm sure the audience will be great. They usually are Cornerstone's audience. And then next up on the panel, we've got Lebogang Diale, and he is the executive director at Grades Match. I'll leave it to Lebo to speak a bit more about what he does.
All right. Thanks so much, Crystal. Yeah, I guess firstly, thanks for the invite from Cornerstone. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So just a little bit about Grades Match and what we do. So as Crystal has said, I'm an executive director and a co-founder at Grades Match. So maybe let me start with the mission of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to essentially enable or make easier the journey of students from high school all the way to employment or entrepreneurship. So we want to make that journey as simple as possible through providing insights in terms of information and data to help people make the best decisions possible as they get to this particular point in time. So we build technologies which assist with this process. One of them is called Grades Match. So Grades Match is a comprehensive career guidance technology for high school learners, assisting them with pretty much all the career guidance questions they may have. And it's a free to use tool for anyone thinking about pursuing a post-schooling opportunity, whether it's in the TVET, university technology space. We accommodate pretty much any learner considering that prospect. It's zero rated on pretty much all the major networks, so you don't require data to access it. And as I said, it's free access. Then we have another tool, which is called Bridge. So Bridge specifically is for the matric learner or the student who's at the end of their schooling cycle and is seeking to go study in the following year. So we assist them from an application standpoint and what we refer to as an application strategy standpoint. So essentially figuring out how should one apply to an institution or institutions such that they stand the best chance of success. And we consider your academic performance at the time, as well as your career interests. So what is it that you want to do? Where is it you'd like to find yourself? And last, we consider where in the country you'd like to be. And we use our technology to help make this entire journey really easy. That solution is paid for, but we have a social model in it, where essentially we get corporates and donors who pay for parents, who pay for the learners who can't afford. So learners from like rural and township schools who can't afford it all, and we assist them to apply to various higher institutions. They literally don't pay a cent, and they have this whole thing taken care of, and they just find themselves, with offers to go to institutions. Obviously, pending their academic performance and the like, but we try and make that journey as easy as possible. Yeah, thanks so much, Crystal.
Thanks so much, Lebogang. I've been following a Grades Match for probably about as long as I've been at Youth Capital. And I'm always talking about the work that you do. So I'm really great that you're on the panel this evening. And then we have the most important panelists, which is Khonepile, but she has been having connectivity issues. And she's a learner from the matric class of 2020. And so if anybody can tell us what it's been like, it will be Khonepile. Are you there? We're really hoping that she's able to join us. It seems like is she there? It seems like she's still having some connection problems. So we really hope that she's able to join for some of the conversation. Maybe a bit later, and she can then give us an intro then. But maybe let's get going with some of the discussion points. So I know that each of the panelists have given us a little background on what they do and their role on the panel this evening. But now I think I'd like to delve a little bit into the issue, and maybe we'll go in the reverse order. So I think I'll start with you, Lebogang. If you could just share some of your experiences around what 2020 was like for you, in relation to what you witnessed matriculants and high school learners go through in the year. You'd obviously been working in schools prior to COVID. And so what did you observe, and how was last year different in your opinion?
So I'm sure last year, as it was to everyone, was a shock. So it came all so suddenly. So as you mentioned, we were busy with school-based deployments at the time. So we were literally in school the week before COVID happened. Where now for about 3 months, our team could not go to school, could not assist learners directly, could not communicate with learners directly from that point on. So it was a big adjustment. And one of the big factors which you saw affecting learners was just the anxiety around what is the next steps going to look like? How does the next year or the next phase get started? Am I learning enough at this point in time? Other learners, as time went on, just because of not being able to actually interact with other learners, almost the humanity of it really started to come out that I miss my friends, right? I miss seeing my friends. I miss interacting with my friends. I miss just talking and laughing and playing with my friends. And that developed for some learners we got to talk to and work with, and we saw it, is that developed into anxiety, depression, and to varying degrees of it. Where they just struggled with the exams. And once it got to exam period, which was also an interesting thing to consider, was that some learners would just have a really, really bad exam. And it just like, I understood the stuff perfectly. I knew the stuff from the onset. But just because of this environment and what's going on this exam day, I was just out of it. I was just, fatigued by what's going on. And I think the last thing was just being worked. So they felt like teachers were pushing them harder than ever before. So Zube, maybe he can he can attest to being a big pusher on his side. But the pressure of just the constant work, because it just didn't, for them, especially matriculants, it didn't really end. It was just constantly working, constantly doing something, which I guess was helpful to keep them focused, but it was also overwhelming in this new format.
Thanks, Lebogang. I think you make a real good point about the mental load that young people are under during COVID. There's some research that's been done with young people, so out of school youth, but just showing there are huge increases in anxiety and depression that were felt by young people over the course of last year. Issues around worrying about family members who are ill, or worrying the anxiety around, will I get COVID? Fear that they felt. On top of learning time lost, especially for matriculants who knew that time was of the essence in their final year. And then, as you say, the social losses, especially in your matric year. I mean, I'm sure for some of us, my matric year was quite a while ago, myself included. But to think about all of the kind of fun social aspects of that final year at school, and all that was lost by the 2020 matriculants. And I think it's important that we reflect on that. Zubair, maybe you want to unpack some of what Lebogang said with your experience as a teacher. So I know my question was what did learners deal with, but as the teachers, I'm sure you were under stress as well to get content done, to kind of fit everything in, plus support learners, plus do it remotely when schools were closed. Maybe you just want to tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, for me as a teacher, 2020 was a year of uncertainty, because before we left school, we were beginning to go into our March holidays, and I still remember the learners asking me, so which books should we take home? What should we do? And I myself couldn't give them any answers. And then we went into a lockdown, and we worked on WhatsApp and Zoom lessons. But coming back, as I said, there was a lot of uncertainty. And for myself, for example, I initially didn't teach matric. So walking in, my colleague she couldn't return to school. She had comorbidities. And then myself and two other teachers had to facilitate her classes. She still worked from home. So that was really difficult for us, me not being familiar of knowing the content, but not having taught it. So having to facilitate that, but to also be the figure in the class. And still, I know you mentioned anxiety. So me, myself, stepping into the school, like I said, there was so much uncertainty, and we didn't know what was going to happen or what was the next step. So being in the classroom as the teacher, you're kind of the head of the class, and you have to facilitate everything. So for me, I couldn't be anxious or show my anxieties towards the class, because I had to ensure that they were in a safe environment and that their mental health was in a good state. So every day it was, I wouldn't say a battle, but every day it was a bit of a struggle for me, because yes, we as teachers, we have to be considered as frontline workers as well, because we are risking our lives going into classes each and every day. Yes, we do social distance and we are wearing a mask and we're sanitizing and all of those things, but we're in a room with learners who are coming from different areas, backgrounds, and all of that, traveling to school, and they're standing in front of the class having to um, relay the content knowledge, to complete the lesson, and you don't know yourself, am I going to get the virus? Am I going to take it home? Me still being young. So there was a lot of anxiety, but as I said, I myself had to keep myself in check in order for me to help my learners and to be the head of the class. And then luckily, as I said, my colleague did return to school, and then later on, the rest of the grades returned. So initially it was grade 12 that was at our school. It was much easier for us to deliver the curriculum and to complete social distancing and all the other protocols. But once the other grades started slowly in a staggered approach coming back to school, things became more hectic for us. So yes, we were worried about our health, but our mental health was a very big factor that we needed to consider, because teaching lessons, our lessons were divided into two, for example. So classes were split up. So we would have to teach the same lesson. So coming home, being very tired, mentally drained. So it was a lot of stress and anxiety placed on our teachers. So yeah, and well done to all those who completed last year and got through it.
And especially the teachers, like you say, Zubair, I think, you had to create a safe space for learners and try to create an environment where learning could happen. And at the same time, dealing with all of the anxiety that we all felt and still continue to feel because of COVID-19, and any trauma that we may have experienced through losses of family and loved ones. And still having to hold space for young learners. So hats off to the teachers for getting through last year. We know it's not over yet, so we hope that this year might be a little bit clearer path for you guys, and a way forward. Karine, maybe you want to speak a bit about what your experience has been at SIBA.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think perhaps just to link to what the other two panelists have been saying, our experience was not, of course, with school learners, but with students. But I am a mother of a 16-year-old, so I think, for me, it was very, very clear that this sort of the teenagers specifically was very, very badly affected. There's so many milestones between 16 and 18, as you referred to a couple, Crystal, that suddenly was entirely disrupted because of COVID. And I think the isolation was a great leveler across all strata of people. That sense of isolation from social sort of connections, and it's an important time in a person's life that to make those connections, to like disconnect from your parents and connect with your peers. And I think that certainly is something that one would need to keep an eye on going forward. I mean, within the university, like many higher institutions and schools, in South Africa, the system is largely for in-person teaching. I think if I just think about the learnings we had, is trying to get our heads around the fact that, when we started with lockdown, everything was really about trying to find a way to communicate and let things continue, right? And as the year went on, we kind of started to see that actually, if you want to do this sort of remote teaching thing, you have to really think about the epistemology of it. It's a different teaching online is a different thing from sitting, for example, in 8 hours of Zoom. The fatigue was just too much for people, and one had to really think about changing the ways in which you deliver the content and being very agile around curriculum, which in schools is very difficult. Because you're sitting in a system. So I have a lot of respect for teachers who had to deal with that. From the academy point of view, the biggest impact for us was on our learnerships, where a lot of the learning happens in workplaces that now suddenly closed. So we had to find sort of interesting ways to still simulate those workplace experiences and test competency and application to get our learners through. And then also, obviously, access to data, no matter how hard you try, it is a big issue in South Africa. So as Lebo said, we negotiated for zero rating on URLs, but that came only later in the year. So we really relied on sort of the traditional SMS and then WhatsApp. It's amazing what you can actually achieve with WhatsApp. to get learning done and submissions done. It was astonishing, I think. When you have to, when you have to, there's it.
I think Corinne is frozen. Um, So I hope I'm not frozen. Um, we are plagued by connectivity issues tonight, as usually happens on these things. But I think Corinne makes some nice points, which lead into what I wanted to discuss next. And maybe we could start with you, Zubair, around. I think Corinne has touched on some of them. But Zubair, maybe you could chat through. How did you pivot, to use the word of 2020? What do you have to do to kind of cope with the disruptions and still get things going? I mean, Karina has mentioned some of the things that Siba did, but at in your school, maybe you want to touch on some of the things that you did. Zubair, you're on mute.
Apologies. As Karin said, the biggest hindrance for us as well was the data struggle for most learners. Initially, I did my teaching through Zoom, and then I would record myself doing the voice notes, and then I would send, for example, the files of the content work. So, say for example, if you had to project things on the board on WhatsApp, I would send a Word document. Then I realized that many learners couldn't access the Word document, so I would have to find myself always converting the Word documents into PDF. So everything had to be PDF for the learners. Some learners couldn't access the PDF files. We had to send screenshots. And as I said, I did Zoom lessons, and many of the learners didn't have enough data or Wi-Fi facilities to access Zoom. And then I realized that it was better for me to pop the content on my phone, do a screen recording of my lesson. So I would be talking into my phone, completing a lesson, and then I would send it. But before sending it, because you can't send a big file over WhatsApp either. So I would have to compress the video file and then send it over WhatsApp. So that is how I overcame the classroom or my teaching over WhatsApp, or online learning, we would rather say. And so that worked successfully. As I said, initially Zoom did not work because all learners didn't have access to it. And then, yeah. And as for at our school, we have what is also called clubs, which is our extracurricular activity. We have 1 hour a week set aside for our club period, which would be our extracurricular period. It ranges a wide range from sport to poetry to drama. I'm in charge of the drama club. And that was also a hindrance because we weren't allowed to, as gazetted by the government or the department, that we couldn't obviously have extracurricular activities at school. So us in the drama club having to prepare for the first 3 months of the years to showcase and explain September, we couldn't do that. And it was quite sad because there were matric learners involved, so they couldn't um, be part of that place. So yeah, it was a bit of a challenge, both academically and with our extracurricular activities.
Thanks, Zubair. Maybe just to a follow-up question with you before I get Lebohang's input. You obviously this was a lot of extra work for teachers, right? We've heard reports from our friends and family and teachers that we know. As Korean said, you can't just take your learning model and just do it all online and then nothing changes. You had to think about ways to get the content across. So, just to understand from a teacher's point of view, how much extra work was this? And then the second thing I know, something else I've heard is just, how did you? I mean, did you have all of your class, your learners in your class's numbers before? How did you get their contact details? Did you make provisions before the hard lockdown started? Just interesting how you navigated that.
Yeah, well, initially my grade 11s, I'm a grade 11 homeroom or registered teacher. So I had to be in contact with both parents and learners. So what I initially did was I had a group for my learners and a group for my parents before lockdown happened. I also noticed that, for example, learners wouldn't want to be in a group with the parents, or they wouldn't be willing to chat or send funny memes, whatever they wanted to do in the group. So I kept that separate. But whatever work I did send to them initially, well, after when lockdown happened, I would send to both the learner group and the parent group. So, for example, if the learner didn't have data or the learner doesn't have a number, they could use their mother or father's phone. Um, yeah, sorry, Crystal, just to double check your first question.
My first question was just around, how much extra work was this for teachers, and how difficult was it for you to kind of how much extra work did you have to put in to do these changes that you spoke about earlier?
Yeah, it was a lot of extra work, but luckily for me, growing up in today's society, the social media age, it was much easier for me to adapt than, for example, older colleagues or those who were accustomed to teaching in a traditional classroom. So it was much easier for me, and I wouldn't say I can't compare myself to others, but um, yeah, as I said, I found it much easier. But again, the learners had to adapt more than myself because they were very, very reluctant to being taught online. They said it's not the same. You're not in front of us. They don't have that structure at home with specific periods. And I would often tell them, for example, I said, I'm sending you this work. If you were at school, you would have had English, for example, for 6 hours or 5 hours for the week. I'm just asking you to work or do this work every second day. And to them, it was just highly difficult for them. Everybody, all the different subjects were sending them work, and they still didn't get it. I said, but I'm actually sending you less work than what we would have done in class. So I don't understand or why it was so difficult for them. But again, I had to sympathize and I had to rearrange my approaches. And what my colleague always says at work is that teaching is not just the teacher. Teachers get a lot of flack from parents. Oh, my child failed, or my child didn't do well. What you are the problem, or learners blame teachers blame learners, parents blame teachers. It's a back and forth cycle. But what I learned through this whole experience is that my colleague, as I said, my colleague always speaks about a triangle. So it's the teacher, the learner, and the parent. And once you got the parent on your side, learning is way more effective. So I ensured that um, I sent my parents message, personal message. I said, "Is your child doing the work? Send me a photo." They mustn't just say, "Oh, mommy, daddy, I did the work." You need to physically sit and check your child's book. So I can send the work, I can send the video, I send the voice note, do Zoom, but if the child is not bringing their section to the triangle, then what is the point? We all, parents, teachers, and learners needed to work together. So I suppose it was a big adaptation for parents as well because they had to sit and ensure that learners are doing the work. But yeah, we all had our part to play last year.
Thanks, Zubair. And there've been a few questions that have come through on the chat from Facebook, and I hope that Zubair has answered them. Around exactly what you've said. How did you communicate? How did you change your approach? And I think you made it very good point that it was a big collaborative approach, and it took a lot of effort from all sides to get matric learners over that finish line last year. Um, I see that Hlonopile might have joined us. Are you there? Hlonopile. I see we have video. No. Really would have loved for her to come in here with, the other side of the experience. But maybe Lebogang, over to you. I think you touched on it earlier, saying that, the learners that you were working with at Grades Match, just feeling that pressure from teachers of trying to get things done. Hlonopile, hi. Can you hear us? We can see you. Clonopile, you're on mute. Maybe I'll ask Lebogang to jump in, but then Clonopile, when you are got your audio going, then just let me know and we'll come back to you. So Lebogang, maybe you can there we go. Clonopile, can we hear you? Hello? And we've lost her again. I'm so disappointed. I'm sure she is too. Yeah, Lebogang, maybe you can just speak a little bit from your experience. What what you saw from the learners in the grades match program, and how you said like you were in schools up until, what did you say, 3 days the week before lockdown. How did your program adapt, and given all the constraints of last year?
Sure. So as a technology company, our first view is to figure out, okay, how do we solve this technologically? So we essentially almost serendipitously got invited to a lot of WhatsApp groups with teachers. So we're there seeing what they're doing, what their challenges were, and kind of saying, oh, okay, cool. Teachers are sending all this information via WhatsApp, sending files, your PDFs, your images, screenshots, past papers to matriculants, really trying to keep them motivated, keep them inspired, keep them just on track. And as we kind of were getting communications from various schools around, hey, can you guys help us with just data? Because that's like our biggest challenge. And at that point in time, we're already zero rated on Vodacom. So what we thought to do is let's build just a mini solution, which we then called Grades Match Learn, which will act as a kind of free solution for e-learning, which schools and learners can use. And essentially, we also onboarded our own curriculum content, which we're delivering in schools already, so that learners can continue following that particular information as they continue the year as part of their career guidance steps they need to consider. So we kind of built the solution, took about like 6 weeks, got it out there, and then started letting schools use it. Then one of the things which came across is that, okay, the lockdown is going to be long, and the future will be quite different. So us being allowed back in schools is highly improbable, and it would not be fair actually for us to be kind of positioning ourselves that way, as priority should be for the school and the teachers and the learners so that they can finish the academic year. But what is it that we can do as an organization to better support that? So we essentially started packaging what I refer to as a second product called Bridge as a solution for your rural and township learners to assist them in the application process, because we knew that's going to be a big headache. So for context, when we started Bridge, we started it in 2018, and we essentially focused with one organization, the Trevor Noah Foundation. We worked with about 30 learners and realized the challenges that learners kind of go through with applying and figuring out the whole application process, what careers link up to which qualifications, to which institutions. That whole ecosystem was a bit of a challenge for them. And then in 2019, we then kind of scaled that out to about 900 learners, and that was in partnership with Google. So this year, we're like, okay, we have some capacity now, some forced capacity. So how about you use that and do as much good as we possibly can? And then we essentially started communicating with the schools we're already working with and allowing even other learners from across the country to essentially participate. All they simply had to do was go onto the platform, register. As long as they come from a particular school, predominantly a rural township school, the platform would recognize who they are and tell them that you are eligible for a sponsored package, which would then mean you get 2 applications for free to institutions of higher learning, and you wouldn't pay for any application fees, anything of the sort. The system would help you track your application. We'll be there with you every step of the way. We'll help you just unpack everything. And through that process, we got about 7,500 learners, let me put it this way, who got in by like the end of July. But then after that, we got an additional about 38,000 who came in after the fact. And unfortunately, we couldn't help them because it was like, it's going to be too difficult to do anything meaningful for you, given the short time frame for institutions when they're closing and the like. But through that process, essentially our team learned to operate remotely. We created like a virtual call center for everyone. So essentially we got, fibers installed at our offices, then we got a virtual call center up and running, and everyone is busy able to call learners, assist learners from home, call them, assist them with any questions they may have regarding their applications, what's happening, even with parents who are just worried that my child has not applied. It's like, no, man, don't worry. You've been getting these SMSs for a reason. It's because your child has actually applied and they're on track towards a particular pathway. I think if I have a moment, just want to share one story, which is quite exciting. So one of the learners who essentially were able to connect with 2 days before UCT's application closed, she said, look, my interest is to be a pharmacist, an environmental health worker, or a nurse. But this learner's average was 86%. And we're like, no, most learners with like huge averages like that are generally like, look, I want to be a doctor. So like, okay, you have a big interest in the health sciences space. Why are you not considering medicine? Let's just unpack that with you. And she's like, well, I didn't consider medicine because I didn't think I qualified. Then we walked her through the system and showed that, look, actually you qualify pretty much across the board. So would you want us to take this forward? She's like, yes, please. Then she had some courage and let us know that actually I tried applying to UCT on my own, but my device was not effective in completing the application. So like, okay, cool, don't worry. We'll take over that application for you and assist you in getting it through. And we got it through just in time. Within about 3 days, UCT came with a conditional offer for her for human physiology, which is like an alternative pathway to medicine. But by the end of the month, she had a full offer for medicine at that institution. What is exciting was that, these are learners who essentially would have missed out on opportunity, but were there in that story to make sure that they unpack that opportunity. So it's like one of the learners, but there are many learners who fall within this particular category. And essentially by the end, or by now, just before the matric results came out and obviously institutions started releasing results, we had already received 1,900 provisional offers out of our 7,500 learners. So we're expecting quite a lot more, a lot more already coming, but we'll do just consolidated view and have a proper, relay to everyone of what exactly happened. But yeah, that was us.
Thanks, Lebogang. Stories like that really make me excited. In our work at Youth Capital, as young people are trying to strive towards the ultimate goal of, their first decent job and a sustainable livelihood, what we do see is that there's a lot of information asymmetries. There's what we call the information gap, and one of our calls to action is we need to bridge that gap, and I think GradesMatch is doing a great job of doing that. As you said, just some misinformation on the learner side because of actually tech issues. And assuming that means that she didn't qualify, could have cut her off from ever pursuing that if GradesMatch hadn't filled that role. And I'm sure her story is just one of many. So yeah, I think being able to scale programs like GradesMatch and zero rated, low data, works on entry level smartphones, these are the kinds of solutions we need to be thinking about, because as you rightly say, Lebo, this year is going to be like last year, and even after the height of the pandemic, even if we did get with the vaccines and we reached herd immunity, life is going to be different, I think, after this, and we can all agree on that. And so how do we kind of adapt now and get ready for that? And maybe on that point, for Corinne to come in here, I think you touched on some of the things that SIBA was doing, but with an older kind of cohort of learners than matric learners, are there any other particular challenges that you faced, or things that you might have done that haven't been mentioned by Zubair and Lebogang already?
Our learners are luckily not that much older, so we we accept learners into a higher certificate and then into the degree. But the learners on the learnership, some of them only have a grade 11, and some of them are disabled learners. I think just in terms of some struggles and something that we've definitely noticed is that one of the impacts, I think, and it links to what the other panelists were saying earlier, was that a lot of these learners saw or see a campus or as a place to come to where they sometimes escape from an environment that is not conducive to learning, or that is sometimes even hostile, and they really form a community on a campus, right? So which was very important for us to think as soon as we could bring people back to campus, how, even if it's not classes, what kind of events one could host on campus to just, within whatever protocols, but get people some of that connecting or connecting. So I think that was important for us. And then also, I did want to say that, for all the doom and gloom, I think there was also some very positive things that came out of all of this. I think important conversations around empathy, around mental health, around the environment that gained traction in 2020, and that I certainly hope continues. I'm not entirely sure we should go back to normal. If that makes, there's many things that we can leave behind, many bad habits, I think, that we could leave behind and use this as a catalyst for that, certainly in my opinion. And then I want to say to Lebo, I mean, you guys are doing fantastic stuff, but just to say, TSIBA is a small private university that's still taking applications up until the 22nd of March. So if you're out there and you don't know where you want to go and you've got a passion for business or entrepreneurship, please, if you're in Cape Town, go to our website. You can still have an opportunity. And TSIBA also offers, for anyone whose household income is up to 350,000 or the NSFAS levels, it is full tuition scholarships. It is for free. So just saying, please come and we'll talk level after, see how we can do some matchmaking. We'd love to change more people's lives. Yeah, and
I love to see the magic happening live.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Makes me excited. Yeah, because I think, again, just having platforms like this where young people are hopefully watching or will watch this video in the days to come, even if they're not watching live, to be made aware of these opportunities. Grade 11s this year to know about the opportunities with Grades Match, to get ahead of that, as you said, Lebogang, people realizing a bit late that they need to get the applications in. So yeah, getting a head start on that, knowing that this year will probably have disruptions and second and third and fourth waves. So I think a question has come through in the comments a little earlier, but I held off on asking Zubair the question because it links into my next point. And the question from the audience was, what do you think are the impacts on learners that you've seen in terms of their long-term outlook for their future as a result of having gone through COVID? So yeah, Zubair, maybe you could touch on that in terms of the long-term effects and how it's changed their perception of the world.
I'd like to look at a positive outlook towards your question, Crystal, because if I look at the learners and specifically those who completed work on their own, I think when they eventually get to university or whatever institution they decide to go to, I think it won't be that much of a stitch with regards to self-studying, because many of the learners obviously didn't have the face-to-face teaching that they would have received in normal schooling. So there wouldn't be that much of adaptation for them when they go to college or university or any institution like that. So I think from that regard, many learners had to learn how to study, teach themselves, go through notes, understand, work on their own. So I think that would be one positive for our kids in South Africa, is that look at what they achieved. Look at our past states, that even though they had to endure learning and living through a pandemic, a lot of them did exceptionally well. So I would like to commend those learners and those teachers for all the hard work that they did, because they could have easily given up and said, well, this is too difficult, I can't do it, my teacher isn't there to guide me, to help me. Some learners or some schools may not have had the resources that I did, or the learners didn't have resources that my learners had, where they had access to data or had Wi-Fi or could Google or get the videos, log on to Zoom. So yeah, that life skill that many, because for myself, for example, when I only got to university, that is when I learned how to study, how to kind of ascertain what I was learning, to go through the work and be like, okay, these are my study methods, this is what I can do. So I only learned that in at university. And through there is how I did better with regards to results and things like that. So had I learned that earlier, maybe I could have done better during my high school career. However, these learners are kind of forced to look at strategies and methodologies on how they can improve their learning. So yeah, I think we often focus on the negative, rightfully so. We are still in the midst of a pandemic. However, we need to look at what our learners did achieve or have achieved.
I think that you make such a great point, where I think we can all think of the little silver linings, of the pandemic. They obviously we've all lost things, and time and socializing, but I think we can all find little silver linings in there. So I really like that you put a positive spin on there, Zubair. Um, Maybe, Corinne, if you're thinking in terms of what are the long-term effects of the metrics of 2020, but I think more if you think about the metrics of 2021. We saw an article, I think it was in the Mail and Guardian, that said it's going to take us up to 8 years to get back on track in terms of where our education system was pre-COVID. And we know that even pre-COVID, our basic education system had a lot of things that we could have improved on, and so I think a lot of the conversation is around the long term impact. So the grade 11s who lost time last year, how does that impact their matric year, and then the knock on effect when they access a learning institute like Tsiba. So what, Corinne, what has been your kind of experience, or the things that you are maybe thinking of in terms of the long term impact of the pandemic?
Sure. I mean, that's a very futurist question to be asking. I'm not sure, but I mean, obviously, yes. There's. I think this pandemic has highlight a lot of inequalities, a lot of spaces for improvement within basic education, rollouts, access to resources, all sorts of things. But I do think that perhaps there's a very good point in what Zubair is saying. I mean, there's the buzzwords of this mid-pandemic has become resilience, uncertainty, and how to lean into uncertainty. And these are the kinds of things that people are now necessitated to, or skills that really is necessary for you to acquire if you want to make the best of this situation. Can you still? I think there's a lot of people streaming on fiber. So sorry, my internet dips every now and again. Just sorry if you can still hear me. So I do think there certainly will be a more structured shift to digital. Even when we get back to teaching in a normal way, I think it would be wise if people could just think about how digital literacy and digital tools can be used to enhance what we have in our system. And I think there needs to be some really serious thought around how we tackle the issue of access, systemically in South Africa. And I mean, people like Lebo doing great work in tech innovation. I think hopefully this will spark some fantastic technological advances to help address those issues. But yeah, and I think keeping an eye on. I almost want to say, if you're talking about the longer term effects, the lower grades, foundation phase where people learn through play might have been quite affected, and it would be important to make sure that there's a lot of support in those areas. But I mean, we will have to see as we go along in many ways, I think, as well, and learn how to adapt quicker. I think maybe that should be our biggest lesson from this, is to within a system of basic and higher education, create processes that enable us to react in a more agile and in a quicker way to problems, whatever they may be, pandemic or not pandemic, as they crop up. So let's hope that there is some sort of institutionalized and within the department processes and systems that gets put into place so that people could react. And I think also, something we spoke about much earlier is also thinking about how to support teachers, not only learners. So as a school, how a school would be able to support teachers with their own sort of anxieties, taking into account that there's a lot of pressure on teachers.
Absolutely, Corinne. And I think, Lebogang, maybe over to you. I think as Karina says, what Grace Match has done has been such a great example of you reacting really quickly, looking at the need and realizing early on that things are never going to go back to how they were before, and taking this as an opportunity to innovate, to think differently, and maybe you want to share some of the thoughts around the long-term impact that you think that has been positive in the tech space for learners particularly. I'm sure that, as Corinne says, we know that digital literacy is a problem. And I remember hearing you speak about Grace Match saying, you would be in schools and you'd sit next to learners and talk them through the program. And obviously now you're having to do that through call centers and WhatsApp. But, maybe you want to chat through some of the, the positive outcomes of that and long-term things that you're going to be keeping in place that you have found have been effective over the lockdown period.
Sure. I think just want to also segue on what Zubair was saying with the positive of the great experience that, or the great perspective input that learners have about the future. So I guess given the kind of breadth of learners you get to work with, you get to deal with a number of different perspectives. So you have learners who, for example, passed with flying colors, kind of like 7 distinctions, 90%, 100% for maths type kids, right? And they're going to their dream institution and they're like, look, yeah, they flourished through the pandemic. They didn't really have much of a struggle. Then you have other learners who, having done all they could do, it was just heavy as a whole. It was just too complicated, just too uncomfortable. The anxiety, the depression was just unbearable to say it. But when kind of they reflected, they're like, I understand that last year is not a reflection of my capability. It's not a reflection of my identity. It's not a reflection of, my dreams. It doesn't mean that they are now lost. They're just slightly delayed, but not deferred indefinitely. So it was nice to see learners, without us even encouraging them, but them saying it, that this is what I see. This is my resolve. This is my view. And this has come across kind of various income brackets, from the, top end schools where parents are paying quite a bit of money for learners, to learners from free schools, rural schools, saying the same thing, that I didn't do as well as I would have liked, but I'm open to, going back, pushing it again, and doing my best in the next phase, which is really inspiring to see. In terms of kind of the view for us as a technology company, and how we'll be look at technology to make life easier, to kind of democratize the space even more. I think what you saw as a big kind of gap was, one, when you work with learners who have, one, never really been exposed to computers, never really been exposed to the applications process institutions, for them it's just all overwhelming. And we've really been seeing the opportunity to collaborate with various institutions and saying, how do we showcase to the learners the process to just go from application to enrollment? Because they don't even get that process. It's actually far removed from them. Things like just registering. You can imagine this year, institutions are asking learners to register and select their own courses for the year. So this is a learner who's like, I've not really been exposed to how this process works. Historically, you have a career advisor in front of you, walk you through that. This is what you should be thinking about for these courses. Now you're on your own somewhere in the country, registering for a course. So, it's been an interesting experience, but it's how do we start utilizing the interesting platforms which showcase learners through video, um, small videos, short, 2 minute, 1 minute videos, that this is how you apply, this is how you register for your course, this is how you communicate, this is how you communicate that. Because ultimately, all you're trying to convey to the student is understanding, right? And that's kind of a key thing which you're trying to get right. But a big, big, big gap, which we've also noticed, which is going to be important, kind of think about Zubei's triangle. You have the teacher and the parent. You need to have the parent in the loop all the time about what's going on and what's happening, and find ways to include them in this process. Because a child matriculating is a big thing. It's like the culmination of post-schooling or high school done. I'm going to the next phase, and it's such a big celebration. But there's that journey which you've gone on with your parent. I mean, your mom is like, or your mom and dad are thinking that you started when you were like a little baby. Now look at you, a young man, a young girl, and you're moving forward to the next phase of life. So how do you ensure that the parents are part of that process? And also understand, more broadly speaking, some of the more challenging questions, right? Related to the financial aspect of institutions. Things like NASFAS, and that being clearer of what does it mean for the various options? Because it creates a lot of anxiety for parents when they're not sure of how am I going to be funded? If my child best going far, are they best being closer? What works for me, as a family? So just that support which is necessary. Then also for the teachers, just for them to, be aware of the opportunities available for their learners. How they can support the parent in that journey as well, that it's not a bad thing if your child who's been performing well, their dream is to go to Cape Town. It's not a bad thing if they go from Gauteng and Limpopo to Cape Town. They're actually going to succeed there. It's not a bad thing. You don't have to keep them near you and keep them in your control, because what you'll find either way, once they get to university or private college, they're their own person anyway. They're going to be figuring out ways to just grow and independent themselves and find who they are. You're not going to be able to keep them in a bubble forever. So it's those sort of things to realize that, it's kind of like that saying of it takes a village to raise a child. Well, yeah, it's basically that how do you collaborate with all these different stakeholders to help a child progress to kind of reach their ultimate dreams?
Absolutely, Lebogang, and I think what you're saying touches so nicely on, this point that I want to bring up next, which is exactly related to having that conversation with parents and learners, and bringing everybody around the same table. What we often hear in our interactions with young people at Youth Capital is how their parents or their community, their caregivers are saying, you must be a doctor, you must be a teacher, you must be a lawyer. And how this is not necessarily what children need. They need to be able to find their own way, to be able to study the things that interest them and not just the things that their parents maybe want for them. There's a comment that's come in that I just want to read here, before I hand over to the panelists again. And as a parent, we had to also change how we support our children. Luckily, the schools where our kids attend was quick and innovative. I'm concerned about the no fee paying schools that rely heavily on government funds. Exactly. How will they become more technically advanced, and how will parents afford the technology, the extra stationery, etc. needed? Many parents in our community don't even own a computer, let alone a printer, or have the necessary internet access. I mean, this panel tonight is, showing that not all of our connections are the same. We're all on at the same time, depending on your service provider, the area you're in, the device you're using. People are dropping off the call. These things happen. So, there is like the inequalities in access to connectivity have really been starkly highlighted by the pandemic, and so it does put learners at a disadvantage. But I think if we want to look at the positive again, the quick response of government to say to mobile network operators, you have to zero rate all educational content. The DG Murray Trust has been working on zero rating public benefit organization websites for years, and it took a pandemic for the government to react. Now, I know in practice there's still some issues with some of the zero rating, but the fact that that agreement is in place is a huge win. So I think I like the tone of the panel tonight, in looking at the positives that have come out of the pandemic, and I think that ability to put pressure on mobile network operators to zero rate has definitely been one of the biggest positives. So just to go back to my next question, which ties in with what Lebogang was saying about listening to students and just making all opportunities available. We know that historically vocational paths of study, so going to a TVET college is often kind of looked down upon, and universities held as this pinnacle, and vocational studies are looked as less than. And we were just wondering, how do we begin to change those perceptions? We know that employment opportunities in vocational training, if you choose the correct stream of study, there can be huge employment opportunities for young people. And so, maybe Corinne, to start with you, how do you start, if you're in the post-schooling space, how do you think we start changing the perceptions of parents and learners and the broader community around vocational training?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, you're quite right, and it is a perception, right? It's a perception that TVET and vocational training is for the kids who didn't quite cut it academically, that's, and I think there has to be a multi-pronged approach, because it's very interesting for me that's not a sentiment that's prevalent everywhere. If you look at systems like in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, they have an incredibly strong vocational focus. And what that's helped do is build smaller businesses. So in those economies, 90%, up to 90% of people are employed in smaller businesses. And a lot of that is because of trades. People being plumbers and electricians and woodworkers in the vocational space. People don't look funny at their children if they say to them they want to be a draftsman or a hairdresser. They've got incredibly strong vocational systems, and even in the UK, apprenticeships and master trades people is a highly sought after sort of career path. And I think we certainly need to do more in South Africa and to change the perception. Just maybe a small example. If you graduate with a BA in humanities and journalism or PR, your entry salary does not match that of someone who studied as a diesel mechanic or a boilermaker or even a cabinetry maker. You can get an entry salary of around 25,000 Rand in some trades. Yes, it may be that there may be sort of a ceiling in some trades, but then the path of starting your own business, which is desperately needed in South Africa, is suddenly open to you, and there's nothing stopping you to while you're working. To go up to an N6 or an N7, which is the same level as a university degree. So, but I do think there's been a big move from government to put a focus on vocational training. I think with our high unemployment, something that has happened, and because vocational training is closely linked to BEE, sort of the learnerships and the points you get around that, what does happen is that all learnerships doesn't always run where there's actual prospects of absorption, and you've got a disconnect between leads and hosts. So learnerships almost become the job. So when matriculants consider this path, they must understand that vocational training isn't a walk in the park, and it is, if your focus is to gain as much as you possibly can from this beautiful opportunity of theory plus work experience, you need to do that to progress. You have to work quite hard. You need to understand that this is a different path, but certainly not a second-rate path. I think there's work that can be done in terms of the relevance of some of the material, and one has to be quite careful with whom you partner, and make sure that your training provider has a good reputation. But so from training providers, we need to up our game. From corporate, needs to be more open for paid, unpaid internships, apprenticeships, and learnerships, and see learnerships as a real opportunity to bring young talent into the business at the ground level, but then invest in progressing those people through the different levels of education. And like I said, there has been more of a focus on vocational training from government side, but I think it will have to be a collaborative effort to change that perception.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we can. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make this good point about, bringing in the kind of the employer who's going to take on these young people in learnerships. And how do we continue to make this a path that's more desirable to young people? I think a lot of the reason why it's viewed as a less than is because a lot of TVETs, the quality of the TVETs or the infrastructure at TVETs is very different. It's not like universities where they all kind of meet kind of a minimum standard. So I think that's a lot to do with the perception that a TVET is less than. But Lebogang, maybe you want to add, you're working with young people as they're making these decisions about what to do next. What have been your kind of learnings around why this option is maybe viewed as not so desirable to young people? And then, as a follow-up question, what do you think it will take to shift those perceptions?
Sure. So the perceptions from young people, it really varies from kind of which income bracket they kind of come from. So more affluent kind of backgrounds, their families would generally just not prioritize that. Would rather say, look, rather go to a private college as an alternative. Don't worry, we'll pay the 90K per year fees instead. That's okay. We don't think you should consider a vocational pathway. Just because the perception is that there's not really a strong prospects for employment. Whereas from the lower end of the spectrum, the the way that they perceive is that it's actually not well understood. From a learner's perspective, they don't understand them clearly as to what do they do, what do they need. It is, as Corinne has highlighted, it is the option for those who didn't make it. So if you didn't make it in grade 11 and you go to a TVET, it's like, look, yeah, you're the black sheep of the school, so unfortunately you didn't make it. And it's that kind of negative perception. Some of the challenges that come with it as well is it's depending where it is, right? So not all TVETs are created equal, if I can put that way. Some are super good. Some are just unfortunately not there yet. So you find that students go to these institutions, they learn these particular skill sets, but they don't progress. And that's kind of a key signal for somebody in a community where you see each other on a daily basis. So it's that thing of, okay, but you went to school, but now what? And then it's that, okay, this didn't work out for this person or this group of people, we'll go in this particular pathway. So that's kind of some of the challenges based on the reinforcement that occurs within communities. However, what I do see as a kind of a big opportunity, and how I think we should be thinking about solving the mismatch or the lack of information about it, it requires a public-private partnership. So, as Karin has also highlighted, some corporates are using the learnership structure more as a tick box exercise, as opposed to an exercise to build like a workforce which can move things forward. They're very much holding back from an investment standpoint and just continue the tick box exercise. Cool, we're growing 5%. That's great. But it's like we're not trying to go 10% because there's a bit of uncertainty about where this economy is going. So it's that thing of how do you come together as the private sector, the public sector, and start bringing the views of these are the skills we're looking for. These are the kind of jobs we want to be unpacking in the future. These are the areas we want to build these particular sort of innovations or these particular sort of industries. How does public sector participate in creating the right environment? How does the private sector participate in investing in talent as well in those particular areas? And then how do we grow that collectively as a unit to build the South African economy? Because that's going to be one of the biggest drivers to enable things like accelerated job creation, accelerated new business, coming to life. Because as young people get into these various opportunities, they learn how business work, right? So it's like that thing of if I've been in a corporate and I've got acclimatized to a corporate environment, I see culture, I see how HR works, I see how finance works, I see how marketing works. You start getting a feel of how business runs, and you can say, I could probably take a small piece of this business and go provide it for this particular market I've seen. Right? As long as you're in a market you can serve and that market's going to pay you, there's a business. That's literally the kind of the business 101 which I provided. Maybe Kareem might not agree, but hey, that's my business 101 lecture for everyone. That if you have a client and a product and you're willing to buy it, you have your business. So how are you going to do that and create that on a more regular basis? And I think if that conversation can happen, it will be a really powerful accelerator for South African growth, South African progress. We have amazing natural facilities relative to most other countries actually in the world. Great resources from a mineral perspective, great resources from an agriculture perspective, great resources from a technological perspective, I would argue, great resources from a financial services sector perspective. I mean, our financial services sector is in the top, 5 generally in the world, just in terms of how advanced it is. So how do we leverage these particular tools to actually say, we can literally be a shining star within the African continent, and not just African continent, but globally, we can definitely do it. So yeah, those are just my ideas on it.
Thanks, Lebogang. And there's a question that's come in that I just wonder maybe raise with you, Lebogang, because Zubair is having some connectivity issues. So there was a question: do you think schools do enough to encourage skills? Zubair, you're there. So if you maybe can touch on this question: do you think schools do enough to encourage these type of skills, or are they the ones perpetuating this belief that vocational education and training is inferior?
I think each and every one of us are perpetuating this idea because if we're going to be highly honest, we live in a classless society. So people have this perception that in order for me to succeed in life, I need to get into university, I need to get into UCT, I need to become an accountant or an engineer, and that's the way forward. I'm not sure if there are teachers, hopefully there are other teachers joining tonight, but one thing I always do with my grade 8 class, or if I inherit a new class in grade 9 or 10, I often start off my very first lesson in the class and I tell all the learners, close your eyes, and I start asking probing questions. And I ask the learners, for example, who's good at English, who's good at mathematics, and you would see various or different groups of learners who would raise their hand, who's good at drama, who's good at art. And thereafter, I would say, okay, well, now who has ever been in a position where somebody said, oh, you're stupid because you can't do maths? And oftentimes they would say it's the parent at home, or it was my teacher in primary school, or even the learners in the class. And I tell them, okay, now open your eyes and think about it. When you go to university one day, you're going to study a specialized field. So, firstly, you're not going to be doing all the different subjects that you are currently doing at school. You're not going to have 9 or 7 different subjects. You're going to study a specific field. And now with vocational training and TVET colleges, if you are not, let's say, academically strong, there are way more career options to discover and to find out about. So I think for us, or for me as a teacher, for parents watching, for other learners, we need to encourage our kids that, there's so much out there in the world, and that for myself, for example, and the reason why I do that in my class was because when I was in grade 12, my results weren't as good to get into university, because at that time, you apply with your June and March and get 11 results. And only thereafter, by improving my results, I took a gap year and got into university. So I'm always sharing my experience with learners, and I tell them that, whatever you decide to do next year, whether you're going to take a gap year, whether you are going to work in a call center or wherever, it's your decision, and don't let anybody kind of knock you down or tell you that you are not good enough. So I think at home it plays an important role, or we in society, specifically South Africa, we know we need to steer away from this classist views of, you're only going to get where you need to be if you go a certain route. So my advice to everybody watching, teachers specifically, our classroom should be the place where we kind of incite this knowledge within the learners so that they know that, unfortunately, as well, we live in a meritorious society where only those with the best results are going to get into universities. So even those learners who got the 60s and the 70s, it's obvious that those who got 80s and 90s are going to get in. So we need to start those discussions. We need to, especially with our younger children, that there's so much more out there. Right? We don't want to set our learners up for failure by letting them believe that, okay, there's only one way to go about in this world. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Very inspiring, Zubair. And then we've got the Dean of Cornerstone, Dr. Rudy Byers, and he is joining us. And hi there and welcome. And you'd like to jump on this question as well. So over to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, good evening, everyone. And what a wonderful discussion. And, for me, in reality, an extreme privilege. When I do sort of a bit of a quick scan of who you all are, I'm really impressed. So thank you for letting me into the conversation as well. I just need to respond to this one because it's such a brilliant question. I mean, why would our society frown on vocational training? Of course, one would argue it's only in some quarters, if you will, that we do frown on vocational training. It's not true for everyone, but it's not an innocent situation. It's not simply a case of people thinking, but something's better than something else. There's a very particular history in our country that, as many other places in the world, that had taught us that some of us, intrinsically in who we are, can only do particular types of things, and others are supposed to do other types of things, and therefore certain types of education are for some and others are for others. And that's an unfortunate reality of our past, and that's, if you will, where I would argue the roots of distrust of vocational training would come from. It's better to have a degree, it's better to be part of a sort of typical university type of program. Of course, in our country, when you talk about different levels of education post-school, then we've moved away from that type of thinking of hierarchy completely. So what we talk about in training, as I'm sure you all have argued already, is that we talk about learning outcomes, who you become, what you gain for a certain sort of engagement. And so it's about outcomes, so when you do a particular, qualification, whichever level it might be, whether it's vocational or occupational or professional or academic, research-wise and so forth, you're looking for particular outcomes with that. So, but that's the roots of it. And those things, to my mind, really are deeply part of the legacies that we live with. And at Cornerstone, that's our debate. Our debate is, how do we shift the conversation around education to be about social justice, where people redefine these realities, disrupt the hierarchies, rewrite history, and so forth. Now, you've all been talking the talk. I'm just sort of, in a sense, confirming what you're saying. So it's very exciting for me to hear that. But that's the roots. So it's not simply people being difficult or not understanding, there's roots where this distrust, almost this lack of confidence comes from. But, when we also look elsewhere in the world, and I'll finish up just now, but in other countries that had to reconstruct themselves after terrible conflicts, especially countries elsewhere in the world after the First and the Second World Wars, a huge part of their reconstruction, of reconfiguring the society and building itself up again, had been in vocational training. So in a sense, we know this, and part of the push from the National Department and post-school, all of those is about understanding that. So of course, it's wonderful that you've raised the question, and in reality, that's what our country is about: is connecting the vocational outcomes and the research outcomes, the professional outcomes. We all have a role in the team to build our country. So I just wanted to comment on that and say this: there is history behind it, and what you've been talking, and what I think is really at the point here, is deconstructing it and writing a new future, writing a new history as you're doing. So, and for the matric specifically, Crystal, if I might jump in, I just, it must be extremely difficult to feel you want to move on with things, but you have to wait because there's this pandemic thing, and you have to wait, and you have to wait, and you have to wait. But who says you do nothing when you wait? I mean, come on, really? Anyone just, I mean, it's to do nothing also means you're doing something, right? So, I mean, it's just, it's a myth. I wouldn't say it's a lie. That might be a very strong word, but it's a myth to think that at any point you can do nothing. You're always doing something. It's about choosing what you're doing. So, and I'm sure this is what what's been on the table. So, I'm actually supposed to join and invite, our readers, if you will, our viewers and yourselves, and so to join Cornerstone. Now, Cornerstone is a higher education institution, so I'm not trying to, undermine Cornerstone by saying let's go vocational. But the point being, we understand as Cornerstone that there's particular things that through our history as Cornerstone we can contribute to the country and through education, and that is the search for social justice. So, but what Crystal, you decide. Should I give you an input now, or draw the line, or I'm in your hands.
I was going to go to the panelists, but I think since you've started, it would make sense in the flow of the conversation and trying to be natural and not force things into a rigorous pattern. Maybe just give the little bit of the background to Cornerstone and speak a little bit about that, and then I'll go to the panelists for their last closing remarks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your kindness. Now, so Cornerstone is last year it celebrated its 50th year. So we started in 1970, and part of our origin story, our origin narrative, if you will, is the fact that we started in 1970 at the time as a Bible school, and then growing into a theology training institution, but specifically for black and white students together, which was at the time during the apartheid years a unique thing, especially when it sort of later into the 70s and the 80s it became sort of a real position taken by the institution. And so over time, social justice had become the core theme of who we are as a higher education institution. Now, it's important to know that. So we're not trying to just be a typical type of standard institution. We really focused on what our contribution are. So over time, the programs that we offer had specialized specifically in helping students become graduates, professionals, if you will, but that's got a serious mission to contribute to society and, of course, the continent and so forth. But so our major programs, our biggest program at this stage with the highest number of students are in education. And then in psychology, which is a very popular program, and then community development and sociology, theology, media studies, and what am I missing now? I think that's the whole group. Oh, and of course, business studies, and the business studies one is the most exciting one at the moment because we're sort of specializing in software development now and arts management and so forth. So I'm doing exciting work there. So, but in terms of what matrics might find interesting now, we have to, enrollment dates, if you will, during the year, beginning of the year, and of course, mid of the year. And the question that you now might have as a matric would be, all right, if there's an intake mid of the year and some institutions will only be able to enter January next year, what do you do in the meantime, right? You'll be busy with stuff and you'll be starting your own businesses and getting going and so forth. But you want to do some stuff that, set you up to have credit, to be ready to go into further full programs, and you want to get some skills to get your business going, to get something set up while moving to the next thing. So what we've done is actually set up a group of short courses under the broad sort of program that we call extended learning, but don't worry about that now. It's sort of short courses. That's either self-study, that's either, guided by a lecturer or a facilitator, all of it online. And in project management, in software development, and so a whole group of that. But let me get the list. So we have focused counseling, brief counseling, We have teaching English to foreign speakers of the language, with which young people travel the world and teach English. Project management, social media in the newsroom, sort of your entry into media studies. We do a short course on South African and African continental history, and key things to understand sort of the social dynamics and the politics of our environment. And then we do the web design one. And all of these courses are either sort of a few days or a week or even 6 to 12 weeks, which means that from April to June, you'll be doing these courses. Now, what is significant with this, and we've made a special effort to make it really worthwhile, is that you would earn credit. Now, you would know that when you enroll for a post-school qualification, the way that we recognize that you've gained proper knowledge, if you will, and are ready to do particular things, is that we attach a credit value to the modules you do, the courses you do. And when you do the course and you pass it, this credit is assigned to you, and that would count anywhere you go in the country. And even if you want to go abroad, there's agreements between countries that will recognize that credit value of the course you studied elsewhere as well. So what we've done is actually to pull these short courses from our formal programs, that you can do it and walk away with credit. And whether you use that credit going into a full program by June, or whether you want to go abroad with what you have or go to another institution, that is then your benefit. Crystal, just briefly, that's what we set up, and we would like, anyways, it's on the website, and young people can find it there. But that's briefly. But let me stop there. I get excited about what we do, and I tend to keep on when I get excited. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rudy. And yeah, we only have a few minutes left. We try to be respectful of everybody's time. Zubair, maybe we can start with you. Just in terms of going forward this year, we know that 2021 is going to be more of the same. I think we've said that a few times tonight. But maybe some practical, positive actions that you would, put out to your fellow teachers for the year. How can we kind of learn from maybe our mistakes last year, or things that we maybe could have done a bit better? What would be kind of things that you could take forward this year? Some advice you would maybe give to teachers and parents and learners themselves.
I think first and foremost to teachers, focus on your mental health. Something that was very important to me last year, because we end up teaching 4, 5, 6 hours ongoing throughout the day, which is much more than what we previously did. Our classes being split in half. So, when you get home, eat well, sleep. I often walk at the beach or walk regularly, just to be active and to keep the mind active. For parents, specifically those who are watching, please support the teachers as far as possible. Check up on your children's work. Are they coping? How far are they getting? Have they completed their assignments? It can't just be one-sided from the teacher's point of view, specifically whilst many of us are teaching online and completing our classroom teaching. So please check up on your children. As I mentioned the triangle before, in order for your children to be to get where they need to be academically, it is a triangle. It is the teacher, the learner, and the parent. We need to stop blaming each other. And then ultimately for the learners, me being a student myself, and what I've always practiced is daily affirmations. So if I know it's an assignment or a test that is coming up, I say, I know I'm going to get that 80%. And once you affirm it, once you believe it, once you put it out into the universe, that is the first step on attaining what you want. Obviously, you have to put the work in, and you have to study, and you have to be positive and go over your work and read your study notes and all of that. But always keep a positive mindset. And as I said, that starts with your daily affirmations. The minute you wake up, some people, it's exactly the same as praying. So those are my 3 advice.
Thanks so much, Zubair. You've been really inspirational. I think really great that we had the voice of a teacher on the panel. Karine, maybe over to you. Just some practical steps for people that you'd like to leave them with this evening.
Yeah, I'm going to try and be brief. I think Zubair is absolutely right. Start with taking care of yourself and the people that you can within your sphere of influence. It's incredibly important. The way that we're going to deal with this is to be resilient, and a big part of that is being mindful of where you're at, seeing the present moment, and looking for the opportunities in it. And then keep on hoping. You will get through this. We have to move forward. There are many opportunities. I so loved what Zubair said earlier. Don't let anyone tell you where your limits are. Be aware and look for the opportunities that exist, because they do. I think, Tiba has for a very long time been very mindful of the fact that you have to educate the whole person. So leadership and self-development is very key in our methodology. So, looking inside, self-reflection, journaling, taking care of yourself, finding your purpose. These are, as Dean Rudy said, while you're waiting, there's many things to be done. And at the moment, taking care of yourself is really, really important, mentally and physically. Thank you.
Absolutely, Corinne. And then Lebogang, maybe just some closing remarks from you and some actionable or solutions that you think we should take forward into this year.
So I think one thing which as you said, we know the pandemic will be around. It will create some instability with the wave, third wave, perhaps, what I hope not. But as they do come, best thing you can do for yourself as a high school learner is create the structure which you can control for, irrespective of whether there is a wave or not. Right? So that is, create that structure, create an environment where you can be disciplined, we can continue the work that great teachers like Zubair will be sending you. Be attentive of the support that actually your parents are providing you. I think one thing that high school learners do, and obviously we've all been there at some point in time, we think our parents are not cool, and we don't get why they come into our space and why they're trying to take our cool away. So what we need to be doing is leveraging off their support, right? Because that support is actually very valuable. Don't be shy to ask for, hey, can you guys give me, some time, make the room quiet or something so I can work and I can focus. And they'll understand accordingly and make what they can do what they can do to give you the space, give you the comfort, give you the necessities you need. And also just some advice to specific learners, like keep your parents in the loop about where you're at, what's going on. They can see that you're not okay. They can see that you're having a tough time. It becomes so much easier for them to know how to support you when you include them as part of that circle of what's going on with you, where you're at, what are your concerns, what are your worries. It will help make the year a lot easier as you navigate it. Yeah, so that's my little advice for them.
Great. And, we're really sad that Konapile couldn't join us, but she did send us a little message that she wanted read out. So I'm going to do that now. She says the matrics of 2021, you need to implement self-discipline. Matric in general is a very difficult time with a lack of time and the pressure that your future depends on those final results and having to make huge decisions on which career you want to do and just having to grow up overnight. Self-discipline is the biggest weapon you can have, especially matriculating during a pandemic. Another thing is, and she says this in caps, take your time. We all move at our own pace. And that is perhaps something that also applies towards working towards success. So I think, that's absolutely spot on. We've spoken a lot about it tonight. Not all young people are the same, and we need to appreciate the diversity and their strengths and how they need different interventions and different mechanisms of support. And I think you've all touched on that in your closing remarks. And from us at Youth Capital, to say a lot of the conversation tonight is focused on those who made it, those who passed their matric. But we know there are thousands of learners who didn't make it and are looking for a second chance opportunity. So if you go to the Youth Capital website, we did a lot of work in figuring out the process for registration, and we're going to continue to be talking about second chance matric options for those who want to write subjects they've failed or improve their marks to access a post-school opportunity. There is that opportunity, and the applications for that close on the 31st of March, which you can find more about that on our website. And so to thank all the panelists again, I think it's been really lovely that there is a lot of doom and gloom, as Corinne says, but all of you have touched on some positives, the need to collaborate, how we can support young people and support each other in this time. And just to be honest about our mental health, I think has come up quite a lot, both parents, teachers, learners, and just to create that space of honest conversation and vulnerability, and to be there for each other in this time. So thank you to the audience for joining us this evening, and apologies for going 5 minutes over. I hope that you don't mind, and you were patient with us in our technological challenges, and I'm sure that we'll see you again soon. Have a good evening. Thanks, everyone.